Hello and welcome to today's video, where in today's video I'm going to review and help you answer a question whether the DJI Ronin SC is still worth buying in 2023 after coming out in 2019, which has been already 4 years ago. So just some overview before I go on ahead, just so you can get a better point of view from where I'm coming from. So I got this gimbal about a year ago and I've been probably using it for over 50 hours, which I think is a lot in terms of gimbal hours. So this is my second gimbal. I have upgraded from a Zhiyun Smooth 5, and the main reason why I've upgraded was because it wasn't keeping up with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. I did use, I think it was Samsung Galaxy S20 before, which the Zhiyun was comfortable with, but as soon as I've switched over to the 14 Pro Max, it did struggle. I remember that when I was looking for a gimbal to upgrade to, my brother already had the RS2 PRO by DJI, and I really liked the feel of it, so I started looking towards the DJI. So in the DJI space, there were a few options. You've got the Osmo line, which is just for mobile, and I kind of wanted to stay away from them just because of the capacity. I think some of them are capable of holding the iPhone Pro Maxes, but I wanted to get something slightly bigger, which I will talk about soon. So I really only had the S or the SC, and I chose the SC because I believe it is newer and I felt like it just suited me more after watching all the review videos. But back when I wanted to choose my gimbal, most of the reviews I've seen were back from 2019, 2020, and not all of the negatives and not all of the positives were mentioned in those videos because this gimbal was pretty new at the time and there weren't the current day competitors out there. So the things that you would like to have in a gimbal, they just didn't exist yet. So just to further allow you to understand my point of view, I'm going to go over the setup I was using. So as I've mentioned previously, I was using the iPhone 14 Pro Max for my recording. It was my only recording device. With this, I had to get the smallrig cage immediately just so I could have a way of actually mounting the iPhone onto the gimbal. And I do have the smallrig filter attachment, which has allowed me to attach some filters. And honestly, the only filter that I ended up using was the CPL to remove the glare. Now, whenever I bought the gimbal, the person I got it from had the underarm grip thing, which essentially allows you to hook it up to the gimbal like so. You unscrew the tripod and you screw it on the top like so, just so you can get those cool underarm shots, which are pretty nice for car content because you will end up filming a lot of car content from a lower angle just to make the car look a lot more aggressive. I have mentioned the filters, so there's 3 of them I have made a video on, and that video actually done pretty well. I think it's at around or over 1,000 views, so thank you very much for watching. I've noticed immediately that with your gimbal, whenever you're holding it like so, or even the underarm, it doesn't give you the precision and the control when it comes to twisting the gimbal. What do I mean by that? So if you're looking to come close up to a subject or far away, that is perfect, that's ideal. But if you're going around a subject with your 2 hands gripping the gimbal, it is very hard to get that precise angle. So my next purchase was this one-handed grip, which goes under the gimbal. Now this gives you a lot, I would say, precise leverage, just so you can get those turns very exact, or more exact than you would with 2 hands on your gimbal like so. And I was using this for most of the time. If I haven't added any clips yet, I will throw some clips just throughout the video of me filming on this setup with an iPhone. No edits, just pure clips. And the final thing which I got for this gimbal was this smallrig double arm thing that essentially you unscrew and then you get a clamp which you can essentially clamp onto the gimbal like so. You screw it on and then essentially you do have the 2 arms to hold onto, which gives you even more precision compared to the single arm. Now you may think that this double arm grip thing is a bit of an overkill, and to be honest, I kind of think it is, especially for me doing it as a kind of a hobby, but I do enjoy myself some tech stuff and playing around with new equipment. So now let's discuss the positives, and as I've mentioned, whenever I got this gimbal, my brother already had the RS2 PRO. So I will be using the RS2 PRO as somewhat of a comparison, although it's not fair comparing those 2 together. But I feel like for the purpose of this video and showing positives and negatives, this will do the perfect justice to this gimbal. So positive number 1 is definitely the size. So my previous gimbal that I've upgraded from, which is the Zhiyun Smooth 5 again, It was very small and it felt very hard to control just because of its size. The grip was very small, the tripod was very small, and it kind of felt too light in order to control it properly, if that makes sense. So now comparing the RS2 PRO with the Ronin SC, you can tell that the gimbals aren't really that far apart in terms of size on video, but in real life, whenever you're looking at them, it does play a huge difference, in my opinion. Those few centimeters in terms of width and as well as height do play a massive difference. At least for me, and that transitions over perfectly to the second positive, which is the weight. So just because the RS2 PRO is slightly bigger, it does use carbon though, which makes it a lot lighter than it should have been, but the Ronin SC is so much lighter and it's so much more comfortable to use over like a longer recording time that this is no competition. I would always choose the SC versus the RS2 PRO whenever I'm recording on like a phone, because having this gimbal for a phone is such an overkill that there's no point in having the RS2 PRO just if you're planning to use your phone. So just to highlight the importance of weight, let's say that you were to use phones on the end of both of those gimbals. Whenever you would be using a gimbal just alone, like so, your hands after some time will start to cramp and your hands will start to kind of shake, and not even your gimbal will compensate for the shaking of your hands. And depending on whatever you will plan to record, this will essentially make or break your footage. Another positive of the Ronin SC is the knob and the buttons. So the knob and the buttons, even on the back, it does feel very tactile, very high quality, and it's very pleasant to use. Another benefit of the Ronin SC, coming from the gimbal that I had previously, is that it doesn't feel like a toy. And it's not toy-like. So two things. First off, it feels much more serious than the Zhiyun Smooth 5, I think it was called. And the other aspect are the attachments. You could have used some attachments on the Smooth 5, but with DJI, smallrig, and many other companies having so many attachments, you can fit a lot more helpful and useful attachments onto the Ronin SC compared to the Smooth 5. Another benefit which I have definitely noticed is the DJI app itself. So as you can tell that the Ronin SC does not have any screen, and on the RS2 PRO, hopefully you can see, there is a screen. You will end up using the DJI app a lot in order to fine-tune and set the modes for the gimbal. And as I've said, it's a good thing because the app itself, it's very intuitive and it's very easy to use. Any option you change happen instantly. So whenever you will feel like you need to mess around with your gimbal, all you really need to do is just fire up the app, play around with settings, and as soon as you change something, it's going to be reflected right away on the gimbal. So you will feel the difference right away. I do have a very last positive, which I'm going to leave till the end because for me, this is the biggest positive of this gimbal and the biggest regret of why I had to switch to a different gimbal, which I will talk about in the negatives. So let's start with the negatives. So first off, as I've said, my brother already had the RS2 PRO before I have purchased the DJI Ronin SC. So as soon as I took it out of the box, I've noticed that the quality difference between the SC and the RS2 PRO is huge. So the materials are definitely better on the RS2 PRO. It is a newer gimbal. It does use carbon fiber because it is the Pro version, I believe. But I'm not talking about the build quality as in materials. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So first off, the RS2 PRO, I'm going to give it a little shake test. So hopefully you were able to hear some small vibrations, but essentially those are the little knobs that will vibrate because you need to be able to kind of pull them up in order to change their position in order for ease of use, which is totally fine. This is fine. So this noise that you've heard is fine. It's meant to be there. Where with this one, again, in the locked position. So what you have heard here is the looseness on the motors. So this gimbal is locked, but despite being locked, it does have a lot of play, which is how those gimbals come. So it is perfectly normal for this gimbal, but it's just such a shame that it feels and it rattles and it makes this gimbal look like a less expensive gimbal than it really is. Another negative at this time, which wasn't a negative whenever this gimbal was coming out, is that a lot of attachments for the SC aren't really compatible with the RS2, RS2 PRO, RS3, RS3 Pro, or even the RS2C, I believe it's called. So, for example, this is an underarm grip which essentially came with the RS2 Pro in a bundle. You can use this on the RS3, RS3 Pro, RS3 Mini even, and many other RS2 gimbals. So going back to the underarm attachment example, so the way you put it onto the Ronin SC is you screw it on to the side of the gimbal like so, and it gives you the ability to unscrew the tripod and mount it up top, which is totally fine. Now, this won't work on the RS2 Pro or the RS3, which I will be talking about. Example number 2 is the side grip. So you can see that this grip mounts under the gimbal with the 2 screws in order to keep it sturdy. Hopefully you can kind of see this. So just to show you the example, as you can tell under the SC, you can tell that it does have 2 holes, which allows you to mount this under this gimbal. But if I'm going to take a look at the RS2 Pro now, you can see that the RS2 Pro does only have 1 hole, and technically what you can do is you can unscrew one of those screws and screw it into the bottom of the gimbal using 1 screw. I have tested this. It is not the sturdiest thing, and I wouldn't really recommend using it like so because it can be very frustrating. So next up, going over to the double grip attachment, which you may think is a bit more universal because you just put it over the grip. Well, I know that on the RS2 Pro and I think on the RS3 Pro, those grips are bigger. So whenever you will be putting this over the grip and screwing it in, this will start to pinch the grip and essentially cause some wear, which I don't think is ideal. I personally wouldn't feel comfortable with using a gimbal like so. So comparing it to the RS3, you are able to put this double grip thing onto the RS3, but it is not as ideal as it is on the Ronin SC. And for me, wanting to keep my tech in the most kind of pristine condition, I wouldn't be considering using this on the RS3. Going over to the next negative, which is totally fine, it's how this gimbal was built. But this gimbal probably won't be able to hold a larger camera with a larger lens, even a smaller camera with a larger lens horizontally. So just before I will go on ahead and talk about the vertical usage, the horizontal usage, I was able to get the Sony a7C II balanced on this, and it worked somewhat fine. I could feel that the motors have a bit more stress on them, but it worked somewhat alright with the Sony a7C II. And now going over to the horizontal usage, as I've used it horizontally for most of the time I was using this gimbal. For the phone, it was fine because obviously the phone is lighter, so it was a lot easier to balance. But if I wanted to balance this gimbal with the a7C II, it was impossible. So just to show you the exact issue, so whenever you're balancing this axis right here where your camera is held onto, you would usually unlock this and hold it up like so in order to balance this axis, so the phone stays upright in any sort of position. Now, the camera had to be mounted at the very back because of its larger lens, which then caused the camera to sort of bounce off this motor or this arm right here, which made it essentially impossible to balance this gimbal. Whenever I would turn on this gimbal, those motors would compensate for the lack of proper balancing. And what would happen was, if I wanted to do a movement a bit quicker, or if I tilted the gimbal slightly more than the gimbal was comfortable with, the gimbal started vibrating, which again makes vertical recording with a camera that's Sony a7C II, maybe slightly smaller, and all bigger cameras, pretty much impossible. But I'm gonna mention it here, if you use a gimbal mostly for horizontal instead of vertical, and use maybe vertical sometimes, what you can do is you can mount the camera horizontally, you can balance it, and then I think you can go into the 360 mode and spin the gimbal around just so the gimbal, just so the camera is pointing vertically instead of horizontally. But I have used it like this, I have tried it out, and it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. But as I've said, if you don't use your gimbal vertically much, this will get you through whatever you're wanting to do. So the very last negative, probably the biggest one without considering the recording vertically with a camera, is definitely how you balance this gimbal. So let me show you something. So you do have sort of a screw right here. Hopefully it's in focus. So once you unscrew this, this allows you to move the plate back and forth to adjust your camera position. But also, undoing this screw allows you to slide this plate to the side to adjust this position of the camera. And when you're dealing with something that's slightly bigger, or if you accidentally bounce your hand off this and move this plate over, you will have to rebalance the gimbal in order to get the proper balance. And it's so annoying that this one tiny screw right here, so right here, controls this axis right here, as well as this axis, is very annoying. Just to show you how I dealt with this issue is I pretty much use this gimbal just for one device, which made everything much more simpler. So this plate does come with a single screw. So I basically balanced my gimbal, set the screw to an ideal position just so I can hold it back. So whenever I'm holding it back, it's not going to move further back or forward because obviously I'm holding it back. So then I can kind of adjust the side-to-side positioning. But I think that this is a very big kind of oversight whenever DJI was developing this gimbal. So now the final positive, and essentially the thing that I regret the most switching over from the Ronin SC over to an RS3, because I had to, because again of the Sony a7C II, this gimbal isn't capable of holding it, is the ease of use, and I'm going to explain what I mean. This will also apply to the RS2 PRO. I have used the RS2 PRO before buying this gimbal, and I've immediately noticed the ease of usage, which again I am going to explain now. So whenever you set up this gimbal and decide to use it, the tilt axis, whenever you are using it, it feels very comfortable, predictable, and easy to use. Like whenever you're trying this gimbal out for the first time, you pretty much can get the feel for it right away. It's that kind of easy to use out of the box. Where with this one, what bothers me is the tilt axis, as well as on the RS2 PRO. To further explain and hopefully complicate more but less at the same time, the way I use my gimbals is that I run a high deadband and a low speed. So let me explain the two terms. So let's start with deadband. So the deadband is essentially how fast the gimbal will react to your movement. So let me explain on this gimbal. So if I have my gimbal and if I turn the gimbal, how fast this will start turning depends on the deadband. So having a high deadband allows you to move this gimbal further before this will react. Having deadband low will essentially allow your gimbal to react quicker to your change. Speed is how fast the turn will occur. So if your speed is fast, then your gimbal head will start spinning quicker. If your speed is slow, then the gimbal will take longer to get to the spot that you are currently pointing at. If you do have some more questions about this, do let me know. I've explained it just on one axis, but I think it applies for all of those axes. So now, going back to my example, I like to run high deadband, or the highest deadband, as well as the lowest speed. So whenever I'm moving my gimbal, I have to move it somewhat before it starts moving, and whenever it does move, it moves quite slowly. I find that it helps me get those precise movements, and it's the easiest to control in terms of if I'm spinning my gimbal and I can see that I'm kind of going the wrong direction, or if I'm going slightly lower, I can easily adjust this because it does give me some slight time in order to correct my movements. So going back to the start of this positive, having the deadband at highest does kind of make this gimbal feel ideal for me. So I have set pretty much the same settings on this gimbal right here, and I have used my phone on this just to make sure that it's not to do with the load. I haven't tried to properly fine-tune this, I've just played around with deadband and speed, but so far I can't get this gimbal to kind of feel like this one, having that ideal precision. But again, I've just recently got this gimbal, still plenty of time to figure that out, which I will make a video on once I figure everything out to properly sum up this gimbal. So again, to reiterate, going back to the start of this positive, is that this gimbal is so easy to pick up. even for a beginner, and get into gimbaling and learn all the things that you need to do in order to gimbal properly. So those have been the positives and the negatives. I have skipped over some, for example, positives, because to be honest, those things I take for granted nowadays. The Type-C charging, so this hand you can actually remove and you can get a different hand because this is where the battery is stored. So if your battery will be messed up, you can get another one of those grips, but that's something that DJI does across most of their bigger gimbals, which again, I think is a norm nowadays. So is this gimbal for you in 2023? Now, if you are getting into gimbaling and if you're planning to use your phone or just a camera that fits within the load specs and isn't too big and you're looking to save some money, I would probably consider getting this gimbal, especially nowadays. It came out 4 years ago, it's fairly cheap, and it will give you a good kind of introduction to the whole gimbaling space. If you don't like it, no problem, you haven't spent that much money, and this gimbal, I don't think it's going to depreciate much nowadays, so you can probably sell it for what you got it for and you'll be good to go. If you are coming over from already having a gimbal, like one of those smaller phone ones, I would honestly consider some other gimbal like the RS3 Mini or the RS3 if you got the money to spend, even the RS2C. But if again you'll be looking to upgrade to a bigger camera, I would recommend getting something else, as again, for example, the RS3, because some other gimbals like the RS3 has a lot more cooler features and the attachments are more interchangeable, so you can have a lot more choice when going for attachments. But also having a gimbal that's a bit more future-proof, I think is very important, because it doesn't matter what gimbal you come from to, you will still have to spend some time learning the movement and getting used to the gimbal. So having a gimbal that you can, as weird as it might sound, become one with, which will allow you to film the content that you want, I feel like it's very important, especially seeing how big of a gap is between the SC as well as the RS3 to get used to. So if you have made it this far, really thank you very much for watching the video. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Even if you've just watched the video, huge thanks. And hopefully you have found some sort of information that will help you make a better decision on buying the next gimbal, or if you just found the video entertaining. So just two things before I go. Primarily, this is a car channel. I'm currently unable to make car videos, but I also like my tech, so I'm uploading the tech content. But there is a lot more car content on the way, with possibly a new car, which is one of my dream cars, which I cannot wait for, and hopefully things will align themselves in order for me to have it. Also, 2 more videos definitely coming, one on the RS3 once I kind of figure it out fully, just so I can give you the best kind of explanation and review of it, as well as a video on the Sony a7C II, a proper real life usage by a guy who was never really into cameras, and all the mistakes I've made so far, because I have made a few, and how to kind of avoid them and know what to look for. And again, huge thanks for watching the video, liking the video, subscribing, and I wish you the very best of the day, and to the next one.